In this video, we're going to expand the decision-making process to include multi-resource decisions and even more factors to consider in the overall process. Let's start with a very simple, short-term multi-resource decision. Do you clean your own house or do you hire a maid service to clean your house? And I'm using that example because most of us, if we're on our own, we have our dwelling that it's up to us to keep clean somehow. And we can do that in a couple different ways. We can spend our own time cleaning it, or we can spend our money, the other resource in this case, to hire somebody to clean it. Now the numbers for each of us are going to be a little bit different as far as how big of a house, how much time does it take to clean, how much would it cost us to hire it out, how much do we make. All those things might be different, but focus on the process and plug the numbers specific to your case in to make your own decision. The first option would be that you clean your own house. In that case, let's use 2 hours as an example of how long it takes you to clean your house. If you didn't do so in the earlier video, let's now calculate how much money you make an hour. So if you make an hourly wage, that dollar per hour is your number. If you make an annual salary, take that annual amount and divide by 52 weeks a year and divide by 40 hours a week, and that gives you your basic hourly rate. Now that you have that number, let's plug that into the rate. For easy math, I'm just going to plug in $100 an hour here. And that means that 2 hours of labor for $100 an hour means that it costs this mythical person $200 of their time to clean the house. So you see what we did there? We made a translation between money and time so that we could put everything on the money standard and evaluate cost against cost. That's the main principle of these multi-resource decisions. The next step would be to calculate option 2. In this case, we're hiring somebody to clean our house. This will require a little bit of research because we have to go figure out how much a maid service costs. And let's say that at a quick research on the web, you find that you can get a maid service to come to your house and clean it for $150. There's the question of, will they do as well as you? Will they do better than you, etc.? But you got to start somewhere, so start plugging in numbers where we can. And let's say that this option 2 costs $150. When we look at these two options for this mythical person, we see that the smart, objective choice would be to hire the maid service and spend the $150 as opposed to using $200 of our time. Again, each of you will have your own numbers to plug into the formulas, but in this particular case, option 2 is the objective choice. Now let's expand this short-term view into a long-term view. In the last example, we assumed a negligible cost of things like cleaning supplies and rags and whatever else you use to clean your house. But now let's take it to a different case where we're going to talk about lawn maintenance. In lawn maintenance, you're going to have a little bit more of an investment because at the very least, you're going to have to buy a lawnmower, an edger, and there will be other things along the way. As we learned in our last video, we're going to stick to our 3-year payoff as the constraint. So we're going to set it up for 3 years. We're going to estimate that we mow the lawn or do our lawn 40 times a year. That's going to vary a lot depending on if you live in a desert or a rainforest. But again, focus on the process, plug in your own numbers as we go. So we're going to say 3 years of 40 times a year to do our lawn. And we're going to estimate an average of, let's say, 1.5 hours per time of doing the lawn. Now, sometimes we're going to edge and have to clip stuff and whatever else, but we know we're going to have to at least mow every time. So let's just say average 1.5 hours for easy math. Again, this is a bit of guesswork, but as we've discussed before, the fact is we're putting deliberate thought into these decisions. We're making estimates where we can, and that gets us better and closer to making solid decisions. If you want, you could track how long it takes you to mow lawn every time, and you could use that data. You could track it for a year and see how many times you edge versus track how many times and all that. We're just starting with a simple example to demonstrate the concept of these short and long-term multi-resource decisions right now. For our option 1, We spend 1.5 hours per time on each of the 40 times a year that we're mowing lawn, which makes 60 hours per year. And then we have 3 years, makes 180 hours for those 3 years. This time, let's say we make $20 an hour. $20 times 60 hours is $1,200 in a year, which means $3,600 for the 3-year period. Now, you're not going to mow your lawn with scissors. You're going to need some kind of equipment. The last things I bought were a lawnmower for $450 and an edger for $150. That's $600 total. I bought electric, so I don't have to consider gas and oil and whatever else. That stuff belongs in vehicles, not yard equipment. I also had to buy a storage shed for the backyard for $400 because I didn't want those items in my garage with the vehicles. I keep them out back. That means that I spent $1,000 for equipment and storage for the equipment for this 3-year period. You add that $1,000 to the $3,600 in our labor cost, and that makes a cost of $4,600 total for option 1. In comparison, let's go to option 2 now, and let's say we do another internet search and we find that we can get our lawn maintained for $100 a month from a local lawn service. That $100 a month turns into $1,200 over the course of a year, and for 3 years that makes $3,600. This is why it's so critical to include as many details as you can. If we hadn't thought about including the equipment in this equation, we would have ended up with $3,600 either way, and it wouldn't have made a difference which decision we made. However, we used casual sense and we applied other items like the cost of equipment for a better picture, and we made a better decision as a result, and we see that it is actually wiser, more objective for us to hire the service out and spend $3,600 instead of $4,600 in those 3 years. Inflation is another factor to consider in this decision-making process. If we say add 3% inflation, which I know is not realistic to the last few years of life here, but let's just say 3% inflation over the course of the time. In this particular case, you would be adding it to both year 2 and 3 for both options. The equipment would have been purchased at the beginning, so it's not affected, and it doesn't change our decision in this particular case. However, your numbers may be different and it may affect your decision. Another factor that can affect this process is supply, especially when it comes to these multi-resource like time and money decisions. When I was a broke college kid, I never would have considered hiring a maid service even if it was the more objective choice to make, because I just didn't have money to spend. My supply of money was so minimal that I had to conserve whatever I could. What I did have was a lot of time, and therefore it made more sense, even though objectively on paper it may not have made sense in the example we just did, but this is how supply can affect our decision making. So I spent the time instead. Now, if you ever saw the basement penthouse and it was a dump, you'd realize that cleaning that place wasn't a really good use of time or money. It's kind of like sweeping a beach. Once I got out of college and got a good paying job, I had to adjust my thought process because suddenly I had more money, but I was traveling a lot for work. I only had basically every other weekend here at home and everything else was on the road. So now my supply of resources changed. Instead of having a lot of time and no money to having more money and almost no time. A car broke or needed something, my go-to before was always to just fix it myself. But when you only get 48 hours every 2 weeks, you have to start thinking about things like hiring someone else to fix it because you just don't have the time. Even if your normal schedule shows that you should have a lot of ample time, there are going to be periods that you just don't have time. You just have to make these choices that you may not like to make and spending money for something you could do yourself. But when supply is limited, you have to adjust your decision-making process. In a similar way, there may be times where you normally have plenty of money, but one month you have to pay for a new air conditioning unit. And so suddenly you don't have as much money. So in that case, maybe you find a way to do it yourself as opposed to paying somebody to do whatever this task is. And all this we've been talking about is more incremental. In my case now, where my heart is failing, I have very limited time on the big scale left, if you remember back to our resources video. And so time is highly valuable to me right now. And so this is even a further adjustment from our normal day in, day out type decisions. And all this can affect the third resource, health. You may run across a situation where you don't have a lot of money because something just hit you. You may not have a lot of time because you're busy doing a bunch of other things and something breaks and needs to repair. Well, if you don't have the money, you can't spend it. If you don't have the time, what generally happens is you spend the time and you sleep less. Sleep is unfortunately usually that thing that gets compressed when everything around it squishes out. And so if you start sacrificing your sleep, then you start sacrificing your health. And just be thinking about how all these resources affect each other in the decision-making process. If you haven't done so already, please click the link below to subscribe and click the little bell for the alerts to know when new videos are posted. Check out the YCC merch store, see if there's anything you like, and let's use casual sense.